We wanted to thank you all for joining us today for our Advanced Pediatric webinar on stress management for parents and children. We're very excited to be partnering with Children's Hospital of Colorado and would like to thank Dr. Jenna Glover, the Director of Psychology Training at Children's, for presenting on this very timely topic for a lot of families. A little bit about Dr. Glover. Jenna Glover is a licensed psychologist and an assistant professor in the departments of psychiatry and pediatrics at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Dr. Glover serves as Director of Psychology Training at Children's Hospital Colorado, and she received her doctorate in combined clinical, counseling, and school psychology from Utah State University. Dr. Glover's clinical work focuses on utilizing motivational interviewing and acceptance-based therapies with children and adolescents across a range of disorders. Dr. Glover also provides community outreach, giving talks and lectures on promoting wellness and self-care, and has given a TED Talk on these topics. She's been honored for awards for teaching excellence, service to students, and wellness. We're also joined by our very own advanced pediatrics providers, including Dr. Will Payne, Dr. Seth Hale, and Dr. Meredith Merkley. Dr. Will Payne joined Advanced Pediatrics in 2012, and he became a partner in 2016. Dr. Payne graduated in 2008 from St. Louis University School of Medicine in Missouri and completed his residency at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. His interests include management of asthma and seasonal allergies, and is married to another physician specializing in physical medicine and rehabilitation. He and his wife have 4 children. Dr. Seth Hale joined Advanced Pediatrics in August of 2019. He graduated from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in 2016 and completed his internship and residency at Children's Medical Center in Dallas. His special interests include sports medicine, nutrition, and mental health, and he and his wife have 1 son. Dr. Meredith Merkley also joined Advanced Pediatrics in August of 2019 after attending medical school at Ohio University. She completed her internship and residency at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Ohio, and her pediatric interests include adolescent healthcare and vulnerable youth populations, including youth who are unstably housed or homeless. Dr. Merkley moved to Denver to be closer to her nephew and nieces. Along with Dr. Glover, our advanced pediatric doctors will be panelists during the Q&A portion of tonight's webinar. So be sure to submit any questions using the questions tab on the platform. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the presentation. Now let's turn this presentation over to Dr. Glover. Dr. Glover, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome.
Strategies. I want to start out with this quote: "It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way that you carry it," which is such an important kind of concept to think about. So we're going to take about 30 minutes to just have a conversation about some important topics related to stress, how stress manifests in our lives, things that you can think about in terms of building resiliency in your children, and then specifically what you can do in the holidays. And then we'll have a Q&A with the rest of the panel. So my goals for tonight, let's see if I can make my technology work, is just to understand a little bit more about the concept of stress and how it manifests. Also to learn about the warning signs of mental health problems. And so when does stress become something that maybe you need to have a little bit more attention on and might be a more chronic problem? How you can develop those ideas of resilience in your kids, like I said, the considerations of the holiday season, and then in general, you're giving me 30 minutes of your night, which is really lovely of you to do because I'm sure you're all very busy people. So hopefully you can have some fun and enjoyment and learn something interesting in this presentation. That's my goal. So one of the things that people often ask me is, so who are you and what the heck do you have any like involvement in wanting to teach me anything about, you know, children's mental health? So here is a picture of myself and my 4 older brothers. This is why I got to mental health, because I grew up with 4 older brothers. So mental health has been something that's been very important to me from the start. I grew up in a lovely family with 4 older brothers, but just really became interested in how each of us developed to be very, very different human beings, especially my 2 older brothers who were rocking the perms in the 80s. And just what does it mean to, like, you know, evolve and be like a healthy human being. In terms of the present day, I am a clinical psychologist. I work primarily with kids and adolescents with anxiety and mood disorders. So I primarily work with internalizing disorders, but have a lot of experience with kids who have acting out behaviors. In terms of my own life, when I think about stress, I have kind of 2 sources of stress that skyrocket every single day, and 2 sources of stress that keep me calm. And this is my son and my daughter. So this is my little boy, Logan. He is 3 years old, and my daughter, Emma, who was born 1 week before the whole entire state shut down, which was a very interesting experience to have a kid in this time frame. But these are my little people who cause me extraordinary amounts of stress, but also keep my stress very, very low when I'm able to have time with them. So in terms of who I am, my background is lots of things interested in children, but primarily I work with kids who have anxiety and depressive disorders. So that's a little bit about me. So to start off with today, I just wanted to kind of start us off with this idea of what is stress. So the idea of stress is that it is anything that basically causes us from achieving a state that we want to have happen. So it's adverse, it's any adverse or demanding circumstance that's getting in the way. I don't know if any of you feel this way, that you stress about stress before you even have anything to stress about. But essentially, stress is anything that happens when we're trying to achieve a certain goal and it gets in the way. So stress is abundant in our lives. It is something that happens every single day, and it's something that we can't necessarily get rid of, even though it would be lovely to do so. Probably the most important thing that I want everybody to walk away with today is the idea that stress is physical. So when we experience stress, so when we have some type of stressor that we feel like, oh, there's some type of threat in our environment, our body has a physiological reaction. So does our kids. So when we feel stress, our sympathetic system goes on, our pupils dilate, we're going to take in like the whole circumstance, our lungs expand, our digestive system slows. It's kind of a cool thing. So like if you look from an evolutionary perspective, if there was a tiger that was coming after you and it slashed your stomach, your blood has gone to all your extremities, so you're going to bleed out more slowly. So our body knows how to respond to stress in a way that's going to help us survive. The problem is sometimes seeing stresses out that aren't life-threatening. So the idea is, how do we appreciate and respect our bodies with the fact that they give us the stress response to help us survive, but sometimes it turns on when we don't necessarily need it. So that's just something to think about in terms of our kids. But we have this kind of physiological response that turns on. So how do we strengthen the physiological response that turns us off to stress? So the first thing about stress that I want you to know is it is physiological. The second thing about stress is that it actually is functional. So we don't actually want to ever get rid of stress. Stress is a very, very important concept in our lives. And this is one thing that I love to teach parents and to have them hand off to their kids. We want to have a certain level of stress. So if you have too little stress, you're pretty much not showing up for life. You're not doing much. But if you have too much stress, it just is going to be a mess. So for example, for tonight's presentation, if I had no stress at all, I'd probably just show up and be like, whatever, what do you guys want to know? It wouldn't be very great, but if I was over aroused, it would be a complete and total mess. So stress, when it is in our optimal amount, helps us perform really, really well. So when we talk about stress management, we want to keep stress in an optimal level. We don't want to get rid of stress completely. but we want to keep it in a zone in which it helps us perform better. Okay. So when I think about like getting rid of stress, not a great idea, but we don't want to get overstressed. So kind of the 2 points to take from this is our body responds very, very significantly to stressful events. That's a great thing, but we don't want it to go overboard. So I'm going to talk to you about how do we deal with that. So I can't have this presentation without talking about the idea of stress in the times of COVID. Stress and COVID kind of go hand in hand. Everybody's been experiencing this over the last 8 months. So we have no idea of, are we going to stay healthy? Is our family going to get COVID? School is something that is continually evolving, which is tremendously stressful for our children. Some of your kids are going to do really well in online school and some of your kids are not. It is a very difficult platform for many students to learn from. So there's this idea of like, how do I learn? For some families, there's been a significant impact on finances and what this means for the family. And so some people have lost jobs or income. Some people have been very fortunate and have not, but there's still this kind of idea of stress. And then the idea of working from home for both kids and parents. How do you create an environment where you can successfully work from home when that's probably not been the way that any of us have operated before? The other thing that is really important to consider is this idea of mood and how COVID is impacting kids' moods. So one of the things that's really important is this idea of grief. A lot of times people have been struggling and feeling anxiety or frustration about COVID. And a lot of that comes down to grief, which is just a basic, I don't know, like longing and sadness for things that we have missed. So this might be things like graduation or starting middle school or high school or elementary in person. And there are many things that we expected that we thought would happen, including the holidays, that are not, which has a huge impact on kids and in parents. And so I think the first thing that's really important to notice is just that the aspect of grief that comes with COVID. There's also a really important aspect of social isolation that's happening. So not only are we as adults not being able to connect to our friends, our social support network, but our kids really are missing that aspect in terms of being able to meet with schoolmates, being able to have kind of that like free play time with them, which is one of the most important aspects of resiliency. So there's this huge amount of stress that is upon us because we don't have these other aspects that usually buoy us up. And then finally, unstructured activities. One of the things that's most difficult is just like we don't have schedules the same way that we do. So be it as an adult, you might be working from home, you might not have work at all. How do you get up? What is it that you do every single day? And then the kids, schedules are constantly changing. I know this has been something that's very, very difficult for our family, even though we have very young kids, is just, you know, are they going to be able to go to daycare? Are they not? And just having those unstructured schedules just feels very, very chaotic. So thinking about all of this, what is it that you need to like be on the lookout for in terms of your kiddos? So when we think about the idea of, so we're all experiencing stress, and there's going to be difficult times, but what are the things that maybe move us over to the point in which we maybe need to seek professional help? So if you have a family history of mental health concerns, or your child has a history of mental health concerns, they're going to be at a much greater risk for manifesting those mental health disorders at this period of time. Things you really want to look for in your kids is if you're seeing a great deal of irritability. So when I talk about irritability, this is if you see things for 2 weeks, that's the kind of the key number, 2 weeks. If you have a kid who's chronically irritable for 2 weeks or chronically sad for 2 weeks, has intrusive thoughts for 2 weeks, tantrums that seem to not like be settling down for 2 weeks, all of those are things to say this is turning into a mental health disorder. So that is a magic number, 2 weeks. The other thing that we're really looking for is changes in eating habits or sleep. So are they sleeping a lot less or sleeping a lot more? Are they eating a lot more or eating a lot less? Sometimes this becomes difficult because our schedules get so chaotic. The more you're able to keep a regular schedule, the better, because you are able to see if these things are becoming problematic with that. Also, when kids are isolating a lot more, so it seems like they don't want to talk to you or anybody in the family or their friends. And again, this is that 2-week period that we want to like look at. And then finally, there's this aspect. So one of the key indicators of depression is a symptom called anhedonia. This is essentially we don't enjoy life the same way that we used to. So if your kid used to love to play the guitar and they could care less about that anymore, they loved video games, they don't care about it anymore. Those are really big red flags that something is happening here that is beyond normal adjustment to stress that might be indicative of a greater mental health disorder. So we'll talk about a little bit later what you might do about that. All right, so one of the things that's really important is during this time, just having an active conversation with your kiddos about what's going on. So I typically like encourage parents just to ask and have a daily check-in of how you're doing, what's going well, and what's been hard for you today. We don't want to force kids to talk when they don't want to, but we want to have a regular, reoccurring schedule built into our home life where we do check-ins with kids so they know that they have that opportunity. When kids do talk to you about concerns, for small children, a really, really important thing is to be able to just give them simple information that is brief, that is reassuring. Don't lie to kids, but keep it as simple as possible. But for teens, just be as accurate and factual as you can be. They have access to all the information and misinformation in the world. So being able to be as direct as possible is really important. The other thing that is really important is be able to empathize. I'm guilty of this, so don't feel bad if you are. Take a drink for just a second. My 3-year-old, when he has a meltdown, the first thing I want to say is, you're fine. Everything is okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Work and pause for just a second. And instead of saying, you're fine, you're okay, instead empathize and reflect their feeling. You're feeling really sad. You're feeling really angry. You're really frustrated right now. Helping kids identify their emotions is incredibly important. One of the things we know is this is kind of the handy model of the brain. This is our brainstem. These are the basic functions that happen in the brain, our limbic system, our emotions, and then this is like our frontal lobe. This is where all our thoughts come from. When we're able to connect our thoughts with our emotions, our brain stays nice and regulated. If kids can't do that, their lid flips. So whenever you can tell a kid this is what you're feeling and have them understand that, they're integrating their thinking and their feeling part of the brain. So be able to empathize with them. And then finally, the most important thing is just deal with your own anxieties. It is very easy for me when I'm at the dinner table at night just talking about my frustrations to just kind of go off in front of my children. Make sure that you're not doing that. It's fine for you to have that space, but be able to do that outside of the audience of your kids about what you're scared about, what you're frustrated about, so you can show up for them and empathize with them without causing them undue concern. All right, so a couple of other things to think about is just how do we build resiliency in our kids. And I love this idea of just like looking at what the definition of things are. Resiliency is basically, can you be able to withstand or recover from a difficult experience? So that's what we want to build in our kids. You get knocked down, can you get back up? There's 3 essential things that are going to help our kids develop resiliency that I'm going to talk about. The first is just essentially meeting our children's basic needs. So going back to that model, limbic, so brainstem, this is heartbeat going, lungs going. We don't have to think about it, it just happens. Here's our emotional center of our brain. Here's our thinking center of the brain. The thinking center of the brain doesn't develop in kids until they're 25 years old. This is why kids basically live at home until they're 25 or 30. You want to develop this part, but essentially this part of the brain is what allows us to regulate our emotions, to stop before we act, to think about what we're doing, and kids are developing this all the time. So what helps us build this part of the brain is essentially feeding it the energy that it needs. So there's a couple of things. And these are the two that I really emphasize with parents that I think are the most important. And honestly, I personally feel, this is just life according to Jenna Glover, that if we improved the world's sleep and we improved the world's hydration, we would resolve the majority of mental health and physical health concerns that exist. So you can disagree with me, but that is something that I really, really feel strongly about. So as a parent, my #1 priority is getting my kids a very, very good sleep. Trust me, I have a 9-month-old right now, and sleep is up and down, so it's very difficult. But here's a few tips. So first of all, if you want to get your kids really good sleep, most kids all the way up to 16 need anywhere from 10 to 13 hours of sleep a night. And the majority of children in the United States are chronically sleep deprived. So this is really, really important. So first of all, even in the age of COVID, trying to maintain a schedule. What is a bedtime and what is a wake up time is incredibly important. And do you have a bedtime routine? So do they get their pajamas on? Do they do a check-in with you? Do they brush their teeth? Do they read a book? Whatever it is, all the way from your littles to your teens, this is tremendously important. The other thing that's very important is limiting screen time in the evening. So whenever light comes into our bodies, even if it's artificial light, comes into your cornea, comes all the way back into your hypothalamus and the suprachiasmatic nucleus. All those are just really big words to this place in your brain that when light comes through, it shuts off melatonin. So some people take melatonin to help them feel sleepy, but melatonin is a natural hormone in our body that helps us fall asleep. So if we can limit screen time at least 1 hour before you go to bed, it's going to help just your natural hormones do what they need to do. And then finally, in the age of COVID, our bodies get conditioned to do certain things in certain places. So if your kids are studying in their beds, if they're reading in their beds, if they're watching TVs in their beds, their body is not primed to sleep in their beds. So trying to keep your bed as kind of a sacred space, especially for your kids, where all we do in bed is sleep. That's a really, really important thing. And then the second point is this idea of hydration. If I could do anything, it's just like increase more water in kids. Hydration has a ton of effects on us. So our brains need a certain level of hydration for the chemical reactions that we need to keep us at homeostasis, or just like really consistent baseline to be present. So just making sure your kids get water. So if you don't get enough water, you can experience more kind of like cognitive fuzziness, more problems with memory, more problems with mood, so more irritability. So just having your kids drink water in and of itself can be like a huge, huge help. And so this is like really small, but I'm just going to put it out there. Basically, you need 8 ounces for your kid per their age, all the way up till 9. And you can kind of look at the chart here, but just, it's a very small thing, but for you and your kids, just drinking water is a huge, huge benefit. All right, so I've got 6 more minutes or so to talk about ideas, and then we're going to open up for questions. A couple of other things. So in terms of resiliency, there's 3 things. One is making sure that your basic needs are met. The second is building positive emotions. So how do you build positive emotions? And I put positive emotions kind of around here. This is the idea of inspiration, awe, amusement, pride, hope. But this is a very important thing. So there's a lot of natural things that is happening in your day-to-day where positive emotions just happen. What I'm going to encourage you to do as parents is build in specific activities to promote positive activities that are beyond the spontaneous activities. The first thing that will help with this is just being available and present and having no technology zones. So at the dinner table at night, or in the morning when you're eating breakfast, or whatever you do, there's no technology or media available. So shutting down the news, shutting down any type of screen time, you're just present with each other. The other thing that could be really helpful is just opening up conversations. So today I was proud of, today I felt inspired by, today I was grateful for, and having these be starters. So in our family, we have 3 starters at dinner time, even though my son's only 3. Oftentimes he just says he is grateful for dinosaurs and his pacifier and who else knows. But we ask him, what are you proud of? What were you inspired by? And what are you grateful for? So we build those positive emotions. The other thing you can do is have built-in family fun activities. And so I really encourage families to build a mystery grab bag where every weekend you put activities in there. It's go bowling, it's do a special service activity for a neighbor, it's watch a favorite movie, and you reach in, you pull one of them out, and whatever that is pulled out, you do that weekend. So again, this is beyond, all of you are doing fun things, but this is an intentional activity to build those positive emotions. So if you think about a bank account, we want to heavily load the positive emotion bank account with a high balance. And when you have a really, really high balance and a positive emotion bank account, if there are difficult things that happen in your kid's life, it depletes that, but they're still able to regulate well. For kids who end up having just a very difficult time, they don't have a lot of positive emotions. In fact, they have a deficit in their positive emotional bank account. They tend to act out, they tend to have a bunch of problems. And the problem is that those kids get a bunch of negative attention. So we really want to build that positive emotional bank account in a very purposeful way. And then finally, just social connection, being able to connect to neighbors, to family members, to other kids. This is a very, very important part of our basic needs. It's one of the most important fundamental needs, is just having those relationships. So thinking about what that looks like. All right, so the couple of final things that I want to say. The other thing that you want to think about is dealing with difficult emotions. So there are kind of two types of mindsets that happen in life. One is a fixed mindset and one is a growth mindset. So just want to leave you with this tip tonight. Think about the way that you're talking to your kids. Kids who tend to do better in life, adults who tend to do better in life, are people who have a growth mindset. So when I face a challenge or an obstacle, or I fail at something, do I think, oh my gosh, I wasn't good enough, I don't have the skill, I get defensive, I take it personally, or do I say, you know what, I learned something and this time I'm going to do it differently? The growth mindset is the key to kids being resilient. So stop asking kids about their grades, stop asking kids about what they're achieving, and instead ask about the effort that they're putting in. What, like, how hard did you work? What did you learn from this experience? Those are things that engender resiliency in children. So think about the process rather than the product. That's going to be really, really important in terms of developing resiliency in your kids. All right, so how do you deal with this holiday season? It's just such a sucky time. That's all I can say about it. What I would say is just get rid of the idea of a perfect holiday. It's not going to be that. And putting that stress on yourself is not going to necessarily be helpful. One of the things that I would really encourage you is to help develop skills in your kids at this time in life. Depending on where you're at, you may or may not have financial means to give your children the gifts that they want. That's totally fine. What I really encourage is, I'm going to look at my notes here for just a second. But I have this idea. Asking kids about something they want, something they need, something to wear, and something to read. So asking your kids about those 4 categories, or 3 categories, or 2, depending on your financial circumstances, and having them make a list of those things. Again, something that they want, they need, something to wear, and something to read. And then just having a conversation about that. You may or may not get everything that you want, but the exciting thing is you don't know. And whatever you get is a blessing and is something that you can appreciate. So making sure to have those conversations early on with your kids, and helping them understand that disappointment is part of life, that you're disappointed that maybe you can't see grandma or grandpa or aunt and uncle for the holidays, and that makes you feel very sad. And you still can have a positive time. So thinking about other things that you can do and creating new traditions, and maybe it is a service activity for your neighbors, shoveling snow for them, providing letters to neighbors about the things that you're grateful about living in your neighborhood, but creating a new holiday tradition with your children that can exist in COVID as well as beyond COVID. And probably the most important thing is thinking about what is it that can or can't happen this year, and just being very honest with your kids about that, and then having them be part of the solution in terms of what they want to see happen. So even for my son, who is very little, he's 3 years old, we have chosen not to go visit our family. And so we have talked to him about what he wants the holiday to look like. And part of the reason I have a snowman out here is all he wants to do is build a snowman. So that's what we're going to do. So it's a very small example. And the reality is, this is a really hard time of year. So be honest and real with your kids. This is unfortunate. We don't want things to be this way. And despite that, so get rid of the word but, and it's hard, and we're going to do this thing that is going to be meaningful and fun for us as a family. So just in closing, here are a few things that you can reference in terms of just ways to help build resiliency, some apps to develop some of those mindfulness aspects, some community resources if you do feel like, hey, you know what, my kid has been dealing with these things beyond 2 weeks, I do need professional help, and then some online resources. So with that, I am taking questions for the panel. The panel will also take compliments. Whatever you want to give us, we will see it.
Thanks so much, Dr. Glover. That was a really great presentation with a lot of really useful information. And now we're going to open it up to the panel. Please remember that we are taking questions, and please use the questions feature on the platform to submit your questions. And the first question that we had is, Dr. Glover, you mentioned structure. For other panelists and for yourself, what are some of the ways that you've tried to add structure to your own life and to your children's lives, or the children that are in your life? Mm-hmm. And why don't we get started with Dr. Payne?
Structure with my 4 kids. I'm trying to figure out how to define that. You know, right now we're fortunate that our kids are still going to in-person school, so that certainly creates an element of structure. On Mondays I'm off, so I have my 4-year-old daughter with me, and definitely make an effort to really try to have kind of regular activities with her. You know, that's usually when we get to mask up and go to the grocery store, and then if the weather is mild like it's been lately, we've been able to go to a playground and you know, have her. I really agree with Dr. Glover, the importance of sleep, you know, so we definitely make sure that all these errands and whatnot allow for her nap time. And then on a typical work day for me, when I get home, I really try to stress you know, having that kind of special time with the kids. To what we usually talk about is, you know, what is one great thing that happened today, and what is one thing that was frustrating, and then what are you looking forward to tomorrow? And then lately what we've been doing is lots of board games. So yeah, I don't know if that helps with that question, but I agree that structure is super important.
And then, you know, for some of you folks who have littles, like that, how does that look different, providing structure to littles versus providing structure to older kids, like teenagers? What kind of ways would you recommend for providing structure to like older kids?
I think one great opportunity is we all eat and we all get hungry. And so making a routine at dinner time is a great time where we all share the interest of needing to eat. And I think sitting around the dinner table, turning off the screens, and using that as an anchor point to maybe start a structured routine. You know, I have a young child, so I can't speak to teenage structure as much. But, you know, for us, it starts at dinner time. And then from thereafter, it's just a whole sequence of, you know, bath time, and then reading a book, and then going to bed. And it's really helpful, I think, just to kind of have an evening structure to kind of wind things down.
one of the things I would say is, you know, I work primarily with teenagers, and it is very easy for them to have a very different system than their parents. They just, you want to go to bed later, they want to, you know, get up later. But I do think having kind of like bottom lines, and so giving some flexibility. So maybe not everybody goes to bed at 9, but going to bed at midnight or after is not acceptable. And so creating those bottom lines, I think for teenagers is incredibly important. Even if you have to get up and check on them. I know that's a pain, but really important.
Yeah, and to go off of what Jenna and Dr. Glover had said is kind of setting those windows rather than like hard deadlines, and making small changes so they don't have to be these huge, very kind of elaborate structures, but just kind of implementing small things to start off with, seeing if they're working, if not, trying something else. So I think that grace for kind of your family and what's working, what's not, is a big player as well.
Yeah, definitely. Another point in the presentation was on the importance of socializing, and how with COVID, we're missing socializing, especially going into the holidays. We're missing travel, and we're missing the big get-togethers with our families. And it's very important to our mental health. What community and social activities do you think are safe to participate in right now?
I can take a stab at that. So yeah, you know, obviously we're in a place where we have to be careful, but I also think that there's definitely opportunities. So if there's family or close friends where you kind of feel confident that they're taking precautions, and you know that you can kind of ask if the other folks are ill or have been around people that are ill. If there's outdoor activities, as again we have this milder weather, where I think the question was about a 5-year-old socializing, but really, you know, any age where you can encourage them to wear masks and still keep their distance. I have 2 of my kids are 4 and then 6, so I kind of bookend that age of 5, and we really enjoyed going to the Denver Zoo recently, where I think they are taking some good precautions and really spreading folks out. And our kids, I think, really enjoyed being able to go out. And then I think this is an example where technology can really be helpful. You know, all those opportunities to virtually connect, I think are good as well.
Yeah, you know, recently the American Academy of Pediatricians came up with a guideline about screen time, and one of the caveats about it was the guideline said, you know, generally children less than 2 shouldn't really have too much screen time. It's not particularly beneficial for them, except rich social interactions like with FaceTime or something like that. So I would add that the FaceTime, it really does, you know, create a bit of a connection. It's not what we would all prefer, certainly, but I think that children really do benefit from at least being face-to-face with their family members and getting the opportunity to check in with them.
Yeah. Dr. Merkley, do you have any suggestions for any of those socializing?
I think for what Dr. Payne was talking about is just having just that element of open communication too. So when we want to connect with other family members or friends, just making sure that there's that kind of transparency right now. So if somebody does come down with symptoms, it's okay to let the family needed to let the families know. So that's a huge part of that, and to just kind of having that you just briefly talked about within the families that you're choosing to be around too is really helpful and appreciated for sure on both sides. And also I think that outdoor activities, again, what Dr. Payne was saying is that, you know, taking advantage of some of the nice weather that we've been having, and allowing kids that free space, that free play in some of the lower risk environments is really helpful and great. So kind of being creative with what the AAP and Dr. Hale was saying is with that FaceTime, kind of having some intentional things that we can do during that FaceTime, if that's having like showing some craft that we've been doing, or sharing some part of the day. So that engagement is really helpful during those FaceTimes as well, to build up that good, rich social connection.
Yeah, for sure. We're so lucky to live in a beautiful place like Colorado, where we can get outside so much and take advantage of that. We had another question that came in. What's the best approach to making sure that our kids are aware of COVID, but not become a lifetime Sheldon? Any thoughts on that? It's kind of
I think another big thing, like Dr. Glover had mentioned, is just talking very openly about that. And so there are really great resources through the American Academy of Pediatrics with just age-appropriate ways to kind of guide that conversation. But you know, it's something that continues to change, and so that conversation kind of needs to continue to. We need to continue to have that conversation with our families. But using some of those ways, either those books or cartoons or things that we can help to guide that conversation. And the more we talk about things, the less scary it can become. And so I think, and that can allow also the kids to feel more empowered to ask questions and to be curious about it as well.
One approach that I've seen that seems to really resonate with children is the idea that we're doing these precautions, we're making these changes to help to protect each other, rather than having a sense of fear of that we could become infected, having a sense of I'm being proactive to take steps to protect my neighbors, to protect my grandma, to protect my family. And I think that children do better with that sense of purpose, rather than just a vague sense of fear, and that they, you know, need to take these precautions just so that the, you know, this boogeyman doesn't get them. I see families who emphasize that their children seem to adjust much better to the changes that we're all going through.
good. I want to go back to screen time, because we're getting some questions on screen time, and we've talked a little bit about useful screen time with our kids being, you know, homeschooled online quite a bit when they're older. And is there such a thing as too much screen time right now, when our kids are just kind of put in front of the screen all the time?
So I have a couple of thoughts about this. Screen time in and of itself is not the culprit of terrible things. The problem with screen time, or too much screen time, is it takes away from healthy activities. And so when you have too much screen time, you might not have the opportunity to do physical activity. You might not have the opportunity to do face-to-face interactions. And so because we are in a place, so it is completely true that we don't want our kids to be on screens more than 2 hours a day, you know, 5 and up. That's not a reality. It's just not going to happen. But what you want to, so knowing that the reality is our kids are going to be on screens a lot, how do you supplement and make sure that your kids are getting at least an hour of physical activity a day? How do you make sure that your kids are getting face-to-face time with other individuals that is not on a screen, where they're having those interactions? So screen time is not the problem, but it steals from healthy activities or healthy behaviors that support our development, and that is the real problem. And would love to hear from other people in the panel on their thoughts on that. But I think that's the main thing to keep in focus is don't worry so much about screen time, worry more about what are the healthy activities that you need to make sure your kids are having, and keep that balance in mind with the idea of COVID.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I would just echo what Dr. Glover talked about in her presentation about when the screen time gets close to bedtime, that's when it can be harmful as well. So really making that bedtime routine sacred without screens close to that time.
I think also for our tweens and our teen patients to talking very openly about what type of social media that they're involved with, and really having a discussion about that healthy boundaries within social media. And that's something that we're seeing more and more common for our teenagers. And so it's really good to have that, again, open conversation about that type of screen time as well.
Yeah, I really agree with your point about that it steals from time to be active. You know, a lot of times I meet families who they, for whatever reason, have just gotten very sedentary with all of the changes that we're going through. And that's one of the first things I'm trying to get them to do is at least, you know, hey, step outside for a few minutes, turn off the screen for a little bit. Don't let it take that away from you. It's so easy. I sort of sometimes label it the digital pacifiers that we all have, you know? And so I think there's such a difference in the purposes that you can use for technology. You know, FaceTiming grandma is so different than handing, you know, a 4-year-old an iPhone with a YouTube video of Coco Melon and saying, you go over there. So I totally agree. Trying to not let it be mindless and or take away from, you know, the healthy things that we can do with our time.
That's great. Thank you. I know Dr. Glover talked quite a bit about hydration and the importance of water for our kids and for ourselves when we're stressed out. I was wondering, what kind of meal and nutritional tips can you offer to help stay healthy and keep meal and snack times positive and not stressful?
Great. So I think that nutrition plays a huge part of our mental health. And so the way that we feed our bodies really expresses and how we feel as well. So making sure that we eat consistently throughout the day, and that kind of comes back to some of that routine or some of that structure that we can give ourselves. So we are able to look forward to knowing that at this certain time is, again, that window period. Doesn't always have to be exactly, but that window period is when your body can expect to have this next meal or this next snack. And so that can alleviate some of the stress of timing wise, but making sure that we're participate in including as much as we can the whole family in that meal making process can be one, a good activity to just to get the family engaged, but it also can help maybe some of those picky eaters. They can see, you know, I'm participating, I'm getting empowered through preparing the meal, and so that can be a healthy way so we can get creative with our meals and our snacks and make them a more fun and positive experience.
I would echo that. I know it's really hard right now because you are probably limiting your kids going to the grocery store. In the future, when your kids can go to the grocery store with you, having them pick out veggies with you of, oh, this is great broccoli, this is great carrots, you know, like this is gonna be so yummy for our meal. And also having your kids cook with you and talking with them about, oh, this is this great vegetable that we're going to eat. And actually, so research shows that your kids picking out vegetables and cooking vegetables with you increases their chances of eating those vegetables. Also, as a parent who has littles, keeping one thing on the plate that you know that they will eat is a really important thing. So always having some kind of preferred thing on the plate that you know that they're going to eat is great. That gets you out of the trap of, we gave you something to eat and now you're refusing all of it, and now we're going to make you something special. We don't want to get into that. So you want to have consistent meals, but also at the same time making sure that they're going to, like, you know, eat what you put on the plate. So having that kind of consistent item that you know that they're going to eat is great. So trying to get them involved in picking out vegetables and fruits, preparing the meal, it's going to get them excited. That's a really great thing to do.
Okay. We're getting some questions about, you know, parents. So, you know, our parents are juggling a lot right now. They are homeschooling, they're working at home, they're still trying to just be parents and manage a household. what kind of tips do you have as far as self-care for parents?
I think that what Dr. Glover had said earlier about sleep and hydration are some bedrock things to be making sure that you're doing. Everything is so much harder when you're tired. So I think for all the parents out there who are working their tails off, make sure that you're getting enough sleep. And the first question to ask about, is the sleep that you're getting good, is are you sleepy during the daytime? Because if you're sleepy during the daytime, it sort of speaks to a problem with the sleep at night. And she alluded to a lot of the principles that fall under this public health concept called sleep hygiene. And so I would encourage, parents to Google sleep hygiene. I tell parents and kids, I think of sleep hygiene like a recipe. There's lots of different ingredients, and no single one of them is a silver bullet to make you sleep through the night perfectly. But when you try to incorporate all of the ingredients, I think it really does help.
Yeah, it's such an important question because, our kids are just little mirrors of us so often that, I think that we have the opportunity to be good role models of how we manage our stress and cope with our mental health, to really teach our kids. And I will often tell parents that we can't take good care of our kids unless we're taking good care of ourselves. So absolutely, the sleep and hydration, finding time to exercise, finding time to do things that you enjoy. It's just so critical during this time, to really tend to ourselves in order to tend to our kids.
I would also add to that, one of my favorite quotes, I just pull it up here on my phone. I have come to believe that caring for myself is not self-indulgent. Caring for myself is an act of survival. It is so important. And, I said this in my presentation, but letting go of the idea of being a perfect parent, a perfect holiday is so important. And those just fundamental things like making sure that you're getting sleep, making sure that you're eating in terms of what you need to eat. Taking just a moment, even if it's before bed or getting up, of what are all the things that you need to do, writing them down, and then crossing off everything that really is not essential, and letting it go is tremendously important. You are not going to be a good parent unless you're just a good person for yourself. And just thinking of self-care is absolutely important for just survival.
Yeah, and I think, Dr. Glover, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier on in your presentation are those positive thoughts and those positive words that we can continue to feed ourselves and to build up. Because I think that, we're constantly evaluating every decision that we make for ourselves and our families. And so that can get exhausting and also can get very disheartening at times. And so important to give yourself grace, to remember those positive thoughts so you can also exude that as well. And so allowing yourself to kind of hear those words and hear that positivity and know that we're doing our best. And so there's going to be times when we don't feel like that, but to kind of lean on some of those things that we can trust, and lean on your support systems as well, who you need to kind of ask for help from, and know that this is not, we don't want you to feel alone in this process, but to reach out for that community help too is really important.
Great. And I think, we were going to go until about 5 till. I have one last question. We've had a lot of questions around resources that families can kind of look to for help during this time. And Dr. Glover had one of the slides that a couple of folks have actually asked for copies of that. So we'll definitely make sure that the presentation slides could be available. And we will be uploading this recording to our YouTube channel, so you can also get that slide from there. But for our doctors, Drs. Payne, Dr. Hale, and Dr. Merkley, what types of resources are you referring families to as far as stress management during this time?
So I think one that's been helpful for myself, as well as I've referred a lot of families to it, is the AAP's healthychildrens.org. So it has a great amount of, it has some wonderful articles that for a variety of topics, and so for different age groups. And so that has updated information along with kind of helpful tips. So again, it's just healthychildrens.org, and that can be helpful.
Yeah, and another one, I was actually talking to a couple other providers today, and we were talking about some workbooks that you can purchase that kids can work through for various ages. And this, I think, speaks to one of the questions that we had in the little question box here about when 9 and 12-year-old are kind of clamming up and not wanting to talk about anything, even though we make the effort to really try to have that conversation. Sometimes I think other modes of communication can be helpful. So maybe looking, the two that the providers I talked to today, there's one, there's a bunch by Dawn Huebner, Huebner, and another is Heather Davidson. Those were two that a couple other providers here had recommended as maybe for the kiddos that don't want to spill their guts through speech. Maybe they'll do it in other means, with journaling or some of these workbooks.
I think a great resource, and Dr. Glover, I saw your hand brain earlier, so it made me think that you also maybe read Dan Siegel. He has some fantastic work on mindfulness. He has a book written from an adult or towards an adult perspective called Mindsight. That's really fantastic, and can provide some, great descriptions of sort of modern psychological techniques for managing stress and anxiety and identifying feelings, coping with feelings, having mindfulness. He even has books that he's written that regard children. No Drama Discipline is a great one. The Whole Brain Child. I've read those books and I found them to be immensely helpful, and I still utilize some of those mindfulness techniques. And he has this great image of mindfulness as being a state where you recognize and identify your feelings, but you're not necessarily moved by them. And there's a great image that I think of for mindfulness of being underneath the surface of the ocean, seeing the waves crashing and moving, but not necessarily being afflicted or pushed around by them, and just seeing them for what they are. And I've found that practice to be really helpful for me.
My last question for the night before we sign off. Dr. Glover talked about some of her, recommendations for the holidays this year. What are you guys' thoughts as far as the families that you work with? What are you recommending as far as staying safe and healthy over the holidays this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately we're still in that place where we have to be really careful about large gatherings of people, and so we do have to be mindful of kind of keeping the gatherings small and as much as possible kind of sticking to your main household. But I think again, being creative with I know for my family we'll definitely be Zooming with my extended family, and letting the kids interact with their cousins and aunts and uncles, and perhaps finding some activities that are safer where it's a small group of people where that they're being careful and having that open communication that Dr. Merkley was talking about, and outdoor activities if possible, if we're bundled up if it's cold, and really still just being extra careful. It's definitely a risky time for disease activity, so I think we have to still be really mindful of that and find a good balance.
And I think in addition to that, there's a lot of stress with whether or not we're making the right decision for our kids and for our family. So allowing yourself to know that whatever decision that you make, just letting yourself have some ease with that. And that's important because no matter what, outside of the pandemic, holidays can be stressful, but this year it's exponentially, it can have some more stress. So allowing yourself to just have, again, I go back to it again, but some of that grace throughout this time.
want to come across as a teetotaler, but my family, we're gonna stay at home for the holidays, just us in the house. And again, like I was saying earlier, I sort of have put it under this purpose of it's a sacrifice to try and protect others. And when I see it through that lens, it gives me some sense of gladness. You know, I wish that I could see my family so desperately. It's been so long. But it does make me glad, the idea that I could play a part in other people staying healthy.
I love that. Yeah, that would be many other times, right? When it's safe to be with your family, friends. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Glover and Children's Hospital, again, for the presentation on stress management for parents and children. And then, of course, thank our provider panelists, Dr. Payne, Dr. Hale, Dr. Merkley. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And our families who were on here tonight with us. We hope that you found this information helpful and they were able to take away some real life tips that can help you get through this really difficult time. Also be sure to watch for future Advanced Pediatrics webinars, and remember that if you're ever in need of medical care regarding your children's mental health or other healthcare needs, we're here for you. We're just a call away. And our offices are very safe to visit. We've taken tons of precautionary measures to make sure that they're safe to visit. And we also offer telehealth virtual visits for mental health concerns, among some other concerns. If you'd like more information, you can visit our website. It's www.advancedpediatrics.com. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks so much for joining us and have a great night. Thank you.